welcome to the Copychat Show. My name is Todd Jones. I'm the founder of Copyflight, and on this show we talk about copywriting and content marketing. And today I have a guy I've been following for a long time. He probably gets tired of me emailing him and replying to his emails, but and he's not too far away. You're over in Nashville, right?
I'm in Knoxville, so
Knoxville.
a little bit further from you, but
Yep.
Still, you're kind of in the South. I mean, would you say
Arkansas.
South or Midwest?
I'm definitely in the South.
Yeah.
I refer to
Yeah.
myself as the redneck coffee snob. So anyway, we have Austin L. Church today. He is just kind of like me. He does a little bit of everything: digital marketing, copywriting, content marketing. And Austin, you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Happy to. So, went to school for creative writing. Quickly learned that they were not hiring poets. In 2009, when I finished my master's, got a job at a marketing agency, fell in love with it. Was very confused that I liked it so much because I was supposed to be some pure-hearted artiste, right? But eventually got laid off. It wasn't eventually. It was 6 months later, worst economy, got laid off, started freelancing. Sort of a circuitous path since then. Got into mobile apps, which was awesome. I got in a great time, built up a portfolio, got into digital products because of the apps. I started packaging up the source codes and selling those to other app developers. Was way more successful with that side of the business than with the original apps. Parlayed that into co-founding a tech startup called Close Up FM. We made touring, ticketing, and communication software for bands. So that was cool. Did that 4 years. But the continuous thread has been writing and strategy. And so these days, I run a branding and marketing studio called Balernum. I have a team, and we love helping founders build authentic brands and make their make their contribution to a better world. We work with a lot of people who really care and want to make a positive impact, and it's fun to help them do that.
Yeah, and we, just our little discussion before we actually started recording, I could probably talk to you for hours. We got a lot of similar thoughts and ideas about all this stuff. So let's do the getting to know you lightning round section. And
yes,
don't think too hard. Just answer the question. So
okay,
cake, pie, or cookies?
Pie crust.
Pie crust. Okay.
Forget the fruit. Just give me the sort of fruit-infused pie crust.
Okay. Favorite TV show ever?
Simpsons.
Okay. Favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving.
Okay. Favorite author?
Roald Dahl.
Okay. All right. What is your go-to karaoke song?
Probably the last one I sang was A Whole New World, Aladdin and Jasmine on the carpet in Aladdin.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with that song, but okay.
I did a duet with my best friend, and we actually won the karaoke contest.
There you go.
There you go.
Is that on video somewhere?
I hope not.
Okay. It should be. Maybe we can find that. I'm going to secretly email your wife and ask for that.
Yeah. Megan,
okay.
Hey, give me the goods.
Yeah. If you could live anywhere, where would it be?
I love Knoxville. If it weren't Knoxville, it would probably be Vienna, Austria.
Austria. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been to Vienna?
I did a study abroad there in college.
Okay.
And fell in love with it and learned enough German to get by. And it's centrally located in Europe. It's incredibly clean and modern, but yet so much history. Some of the best coffee in the world. It's actually what all the coffee culture in Turkey made its way to Europe
Wow.
through Vienna.
Yeah, that Turkish and Armageddon coffee is just different than everything else.
That's right.
My brother went to Armenia a couple years ago on a mission trip, and they brought back some coffee, and it's totally different. It's very much like Turkish, so definitely a lot different. In that vein, what influencer would you like to meet for a cup of coffee?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. I wouldn't. I would consider Nathan Barry a friend. I would love to catch up with him. He had a new baby. He's working on a tiny home. If we're talking about somebody I didn't know at all, I think I'd enjoy talking to Brene Brown, or maybe this guy I heard on a podcast. His name is Jim Dethmer. He was interviewed by Shane Parrish on the Knowledge Project podcast. And I think Jim is fascinating. And I was listening to this interview, and it was one of those situations where I thought, I might need to pull the car over. I'm not sure I'm okay to be driving right now, because so many things that Jim was saying were going so deep, just about self-awareness and self-acceptance. So I'm not even sure he's considered an influencer, but would love to have a conversation with him. He's just seems like a very wise person.
Well, the original question was celebrity. I think I changed it to influencer, one of the last podcasts or shows. And so it could be either celebrity or influencer, but influencer is really somebody who's an influencer to you, right? So it could be, somebody really influencing, or somebody who just, maybe influencer to you. So favorite subject in school?
English or literature, for sure.
Do you have a personal motto?
Oh man. Love fiercely.
Okay. Excuse me. Do you have any famous distant relatives or friends?
I don't think so. A bunch of people are on the edge, and the more influential and wealthy people that I know are people who prefer to fly under the radar. So even though they have money and power, a lot of people would never know that.
Yeah, there are a lot of people like that out there, and that's it's kind of a different group of people, I guess you might say.
I wouldn't say that I know anyone super famous though. Yet, had this daydream one time that Kanye West asked me to be his chaplain, which was one of the oddest dreams I've ever had. So that's going to happen eventually.
Very well may. Yeah.
Very well may. Yeah. So
I don't know that I
always agree with the guest, right?
Yeah. I mean, hey, you never know, right? He may watch this actual show and then call you up. So there you go.
It was back during my close-up days, and he and Taylor Swift were feuding in public. And I had this idea that Kanye West could go on a house show tour, driven by a lottery. So all of his fans could enter a lottery, and you'd pick 30 people. But this happened after he buried the hatchet with Taylor Swift, and all of the sales from these tickets went to the charity of Taylor Swift's choice. And all of the songs that he sang were Taylor Swift songs, his covers of them. Halfway through the tour, Taylor Swift would join him, and they were performing as a duo, only Taylor Swift songs. And then at the very end, Ryan Adams came in because he did a whole album of Taylor Swift cover songs. So this was how involved my dream was, and it just was one of the weirder experiences I've had.
And your subconscious didn't think to bring Ed Sheeran into that?
He should come in too.
Yeah.
And maybe that's like the grand finale, and then they do like a real tour and go sell out all the arenas with these 4 like megastars, right?
I just prefer the old classic rock, man. The
Yeah.
80s, the 80s was the era.
That's I still some like I heard Tom Petty the other day when I walked into a store, and like like I immediately felt better. You know, when he came on the harmonica, and I was like, yes. You
Perhaps
know, and
one of the most underrated Super Bowl halftime shows right there.
well, I loved his album Wildflowers because that was one of the very first albums I ever even bought and owned. And I understand why when I was growing up, my dad just wanted to listen to the music he listened to in the 60s and 70s because I'm like, I bet same deal. It makes him feel a certain way.
Yeah,
And he likes that.
it's
You know?
nostalgia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I watched a documentary, actually a movie, I'm sorry, over the weekend about the band The Runaways, the teen girls from the 70s, Joan Jett, Lita Ford, and
Mm-hmm.
some of those. And I didn't know much about them. I knew who Lita Ford and Joan Jett were because they were big in the 80s when I was a kid. And it was really fascinating to me. And Kristen Stewart from the girl that played in Twilight series,
Yeah.
and Dakota Fanning played the lead characters, and they were
Huh.
fantastic in
Huh.
the movie. I was very blown away, and newfound appreciation for the Runaways as a band, even though I didn't know them as much. And
Hmm.
recently, I saw a documentary on Netflix about ZZ Top, and even more of a fan now than I was before. So,
It's
uh,
fun when that happens instead of the opposite because sometimes you learn more about like writers, performing artists, and you're kind of like, ooh, like that
well,
changes things for me,
those
you know?
girls and their manager, they were definitely wild, and certainly, you know, not the kind of things that you would do or be appreciative of in church. But what they
That's funny.
did, and they were kind of considered punk rock, and they had at least one song. It was very risque stuff for sure, especially Cherie Curie. I think it was the girl that Dakota Fanning played, and she was very provocative on stage. But right after that, of course, you did have Heart. Heart it was not an all girl band, but the two front people were ladies, sisters. The Wilson sisters. They kind of went all throughout the 70s and 80s. But right after the Runaways, of course, Joan came out and did her thing, and then you had the Go Go's and you had the Bangles, and those two hit big. And I think
Hmm.
the Runaways kind of served as a precursor that an all-female band could play in that space and be
Hmm.
successful. And I think
Sort of
that's
pioneers in that
yeah,
respect
yeah.
to some degree.
I mean, so it was just and I'm a huge Bengals fan, and I'm a
Mm.
huge, pretty big Go-Go's fan, and of course, yeah, it goes back to when I was a kid, but uh, and the Bengals are fantastic, and of course, anyway, we can go on forever about music stuff. I love it, and I love the storytelling of
Yeah,
it, and that's what I really appreciate about ZZ Top. Some documentaries can be very boring, but this one wasn't. They did a great job of interviews and storytelling,
mm.
and it wasn't very long, like hour and 40 minutes maybe, so it wasn't really very long. And like the Tom Petty one's 4 hours long, and I watched like an hour of it, maybe an hour and a half of it. It's just too long.
You're done.
Break that
Yeah,
up in a series if you ask me. But um, anyway, I love storytelling, and I think it's a crucial part of branding. And that
sure.
is one of the reasons I brought you on to talk about branding. I know you're big on branding, and you were talking about some of the reasons you got into branding and helping people with their messaging
Hmm.
before we got on the thing. So, um, talk about that. I'm actually going to skip my first question, or I may get to it later. But based on what you were talking about before we got on, you said people would hire you to do the tactical stuff, but
Sure.
you were missing. They were missing the strategy part, and that's kind of where you got into brand messaging and strategy.
Yeah, so I think anyone who has done copywriting, anyone who has written content for a client has been in that position where the client asks you to improve or recreate, whether it's a sales page, whether it's just web content, whatever, email series, and they know that there's something lacking and they want you to fill in the gaps, but they don't give you the right stuff to fill in the gaps. Hey, could you just fluff it up a little bit?
Right.
And I remember this one particular client, national brand, I won't name them, but their headquarters is near Knoxville, and they launched a new restaurant concept. And they're like, hey, can you write the story?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the story was a bunch of executives in a boardroom sat around and decided that there was an opportunity in the fast casual seafood market, and maybe we should spin up a new concept to go head to head with Red Lobster or whatever, right? And so there was no story. So I was being asked to like manufacture, fabricate the story, but even though the writing was fine, it's like there was no soul, like there was no heart in this. And that's sort of what launched me into brand strategy, because I realized it's a lot easier to write sales copy, web content, if there's an obvious value proposition here. And I will say that people's brand sophistication has grown over the last couple of years. And so I do have clients now who say, well, we need help with our brand story, or, we need help with our messaging because it's not unified across all of our platforms, or we do good work, that's just not coming through clearly in the words that we use to describe ourselves. Like the way they diagnose the problem varies, but the crux of the matter is that they don't have clarity around what their brand is. And that sent me on this journey of saying, well, what is a brand? And I think a brand is the complete expression of an organization, both externally and internally. I think there are a lot of brand strategists out there that would tell you your customers own the brand. I flatly disagree with that, because the best brands are leaders in the sense that they take people somewhere. They make people feel a certain way. Or they say, hey, if you think this and this and this, and if you believe this and this and this, then come stand with us because of what we stand for, right? So as I learned more about branding, I realized that brand strategy in particular was what a lot of companies lack, a lot of brands lack. And the reason they don't come across as authentic, and the reason it's actually hard for people to know the value that they create, is because they don't have clarity in the first place around what is our mission? What do we exist to do? What are the tangible ways that we're serving our target audience, our customers? What are the tangible ways we serve them and make their lives better? Okay, and then what is the mountain off in the distance? Like, what are we walking toward, marching toward? That's the vision, right? What do we want to exist 5 or 10 years from now that doesn't exist currently? Then meanwhile, okay, how do we approach what we do? What are the operating principles that guide our day-to-day functioning as an organization? Your brand values aren't just posters you put up on the wall. Because we're both children of the 80s, you know these posters the way I do, right? Like they have a mountain or like a serene alpine lake, and then like a nice sentiment. Your core brand values those should be your operating principles. They determine how you make decisions. Like one of Belernum's is honor. Like I want to be honoring in the way I communicate with my team members, with our strategic partners. Like if you and I were to team up and we were to tag team a project together, my clients, vendors and freelancers that we work with, right? And so that core value of honor means if a client says something that I think is unfair, I don't get to give that client a piece of my mind. I instead take a step back and say, what is the most honoring response? Now, I'm still human and I make mistakes a lot, but you better believe that being like armed with those brand values, I should say being armed with clarity and knowing what my brand values are has helped me make better decisions, more consistent decisions, right? And so it's like you have an organization that's been around 30 years. Like one of my clients right now, they've been around for years. They've made a lot of money, but they're changing. They're becoming more of a technology and content company than a pure consulting company. They are looking to create scalable solutions that can deliver their content to more customers more quickly. So as their business model morphs, what is the overarching brand, right? And so there are many different like times or triggering events that cause founders and business leaders to take a step back and say, okay, what does on brand even mean for us? Like, because they're like, how do you make an on brand decision? Or as we were talking about at the very beginning, how does a copywriter produce a sales page that captures the brand voice and the appropriate tone for that context? Because just like people, where if I'm correcting one of my kids, my tone's going to be very different than when I'm catching up over coffee with an old friend. It's appropriate for a brand voice to have different tones, right? Sometimes your tone may be more lighthearted and entertaining. Sometimes it may be more didactic and educational, right? But anyway, one of the reasons that our clients, yours and mine, struggle with creating compelling messaging or even copy that converts well is because they don't have clarity around their brand, let alone their brand personality, let alone that personality's voice and the appropriate tone for this particular piece of writing. Like I spent some time explaining to one of our clients that we will use one tone for web content where the goal is educating prospective customers about our product, its features and benefits, and the good that it's going to do them if they buy it, right? Our tone is totally different on Instagram. Because the expectations that our audience brings to Instagram are totally different. They're not looking for many billboards from us. They're looking for more conversational, more punchy interactions, right?
Yep.
Because like our client was confused. He was like, I don't like some of the, I think he called them captions, right? I don't like the captions you all are using on Instagram. It's like, well, it's not quite a caption, you know, it just is, there's been a lot of education, but we had to explain a brand voice can have different tones, and that tone should change based on where the brand is interacting with people, right?
Yeah.
So I think that sort of gets to the heart of your question. Like, why did I get interested in branding? Well, having clear brand strategy, having not only a strong visual identity with logo, color palette, typography lockups, illustration, iconography, but having a clear verbal identity for a brand really simplifies and clarifies the copywriting side of things. Oh, what is your brand voice? Here is what our brand voice is. Here are the attributes. Here's what it's not. We are not cheeky. We are not weird. We are not whimsical. What are we? We are thoughtful. We are, we're experts. And what we mean by experts is we show evidence, right? So it takes work, but I will say that when we sell brand strategy to clients, they're like, I finally feel confident in talking about what we do. Because one of our big exercises is listing out as many of their differentiators as we can, and then force ranking those into the, let's say, 5 to 10 that will be most important to the audience based on the type of value the audience wants to receive from the brand, the company, the nonprofit, the organization, right? And once we force rank those differentiators and we start crafting the elevator pitch, the brand positioning statement, the different forms of the value proposition, short, medium, long, basically, you have a founder who's finally able to say succinctly, instead of in 30 minutes, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's how we do it, here's why we do it, and here's what we would like for you to do next. And as a copywriter, you're like, imagine if every one of your clients brought to you that brand strategy and said, here's who we are. And here's the lane you need to stay inside of. You'd be like, whoo, my job just got a whole lot easier, you know? As a digital marketer and a content marketer, you know, having all that in place makes things a lot easier.
Yeah. So when you were doing more copywriting, did people come to you without all that information and you have to like make it up on the fly, or you just have a harder time doing the copywriting? Or
so I used questionnaires a lot. And if we want to get tactical down to process stuff, I do think a lot of writers they're put between a rock and a hard place where they really want to produce great writing or great copy. But what happens when you try to get a sense of what the brand voice is, you figure out, okay, what are your differentiators, your unique selling points? Or, hey, what are the biggest fears that your ideal customer brings to the table in a sales conversation with you? And you just sort of get that blank look from a client.
Yeah.
The
other thing is if you do the questionnaire in terms of a form, the answers are not really very good.
They're not very rich.
And on top of that, sometimes they just really don't know, but they're giving you something. We really think the pain points are this, but when you go look at what the customers say, you realize that's not what the pain. That's why so many conversion copywriters will do their own research. Because
you can't trust the research that the client has done. It may have been cursory, surface level, to actually go and interview some customers, and you may figure out. And honestly, I don't enjoy confrontation. I have really great clients. I mean, really great clients, especially right now. Just people who trust me, let me lead. That's nice. But from time to time with a new client, if I'm trying to explain the importance of something like brand strategy, or I'm trying to explain that we might need to do some more competitive analysis, or we might need to, can I interview some of your best customers? to explain that, hey, we're only going to get smarter. We'll come up with new insights that we can layer on top. Meanwhile, I need to go. Meanwhile, my voice sounded funny. Meanwhile, I need to go gather some evidence to support my hunches, which are, I've been doing this 11 years. So when it comes to the writing stuff, it's pretty easy for me to have a couple of conversations with a client and be able to pick out the true differentiators pretty quickly, right? Like, even if it's like, oh, Patsy, she's our tech, she's our secret weapon. And then when you find out that, well, one part of the secret sauce of this company is they've got really healthy culture and they've got high retention and people want to work here their whole lives. And the continuity of the team is really attractive to the customers because they like being able to talk to Patsy, right?
Every single time. Yeah.
Because continuity often translates into better customer service.
More trust.
More trust, right? And but to say that they have good customer service is about the most banal and uninteresting thing you could possibly say. But to instead say, you'll be able to talk to somebody you know and have a relationship with. We typically respond to communications within 24 hours. And we keep a file on each one of our customers so that you're not going to have to repeat yourself constantly.
Yeah.
Suddenly you're like, you've got my number. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's what I like about my banker. I like having somebody I can email and he already knows, he already has the full context, right? So I will do some customer interviews. I'll email founders. People are always more interesting than they give themselves credit for.
Sure. Yeah.
And so to talk to the founder and be like, why? I mean, this can't have been an easy road to walk. Why did you do this? Or, hey, if money were no object, what would you be doing with this company? I had one client, she was like, I want to start a scholarship fund for underprivileged girls. And I was like, holy crap, why aren't we talking about that on the website?
Exactly.
So when you get into the heart, when you get into the brand position, that's when things get really interesting. That's when I get inspired. That's when I want to bring my best work, right?
Yeah.
So just being airdropped in and being asked to do a little bit of tactical work just really isn't as interesting to me anymore as how do I help you reconnect with your transcendent purpose as a founder or a business leader, and then let's infect your team with that transcendent purpose, and then get you all rowing in the same direction with brand strategy. And then sure enough, when you do encounter the right people, you're like, hey, here's where we're headed. You want to come with us? You'll have customers that are like, that's when they want to wear your t-shirt. That's when they want to put on your hat.
That's when they become super fans.
Because you stand for something beyond profitability or a transactional relationship. And like brand has really evolved over the last 50, 60 years. I think as some of our bigger narratives have broken down, it has become easier to wear a Yeti hat than a hat with an American flag on it, because the idea of patriotism is more complex perhaps than it used to be. Media has changed that. Technology has changed that. But if I put on a Yeti hat, I'm sending out a signal about how I want you to perceive me, right? So interestingly enough, brands can be leaders now.
Yeah, and I think you have to dig
for something.
You have to dig to get that information. It doesn't come with a simple survey. I mean, surveys are great.
That's right.
But you know, to get real answers, you have to interview. And maybe that's hang up for some people because if you're doing that kind of work, you got to account for it, which
You got
means
to
it costs
charge for
more.
it.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly.
Yeah.
And but the result on the back end after doing that and getting some real clear differentiators, some values as a company holds on to, something people can get behind, those kinds of those kind of benefits are just hard to measure or hard to get across that a company needs to do this because does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I have encountered that in sales conversations where there are always going to be some people who are like, yeah, that sounds great, but I still just need the stuff. And that's when I have to decide whether I want to say, yes, you can have the stuff. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm like, I've said my piece. I don't think the writing will be nearly as effective as it could be if we don't do the foundation level work. Because I think about brand as having 4 building blocks: foundation, strategy, identity, and experience. Each of those blocks has 4 corners. And
Foundation, say it again.
foundation, strategy, identity, experience. And so our brand workshops, you talked about digging deep. I agree. And we've even realized a workshop where all of the stakeholders basically time out their usual responsibilities and they participate in a workshop for a day and a half with basically their phones turned off. That's a big ask, but that's where the gold comes from. Because it's really cool to see all these tough business guys get misty eyed when they talk about how passionate they are about paying all their people minimum wage not minimum wage, a livable wage. And they're like, the reason we want to be more profitable is because we want to provide more benefits.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And then here's the thing, it can be expensive, but what happens on the other end? One of my clients, we did the workshop in January. And then, so within probably we can normally turn around, if we do a workshop and we get everything we need, we can normally turn around the strategy in 5 to 7 business days. We've got our process really buttoned up at this point, but he went out and within a month had closed $1 million in new business. So I have seen how powerful and energizing it is to know, here's what we're all about.
And I just don't think you can do that very well without interview type discussions, whether it's with the founder or with their customers.
It's not scalable, and it is hands-on, and you are rolling up your sleeves and kind of getting in the trenches with your clients. But the fact is, if you do it, good brand strategy can, like I said, it is your operating manual for your brand out in the real world. And how do you put a price tag on carrying that with you for the next 5 to 10 years? Now, granted, your brand strategy is a living thing, because as you actually meet some of your brand goals and your business goals, as you approach that mountain, that vision off in the distance, well, guess what? You're like, well, we just sailed past our revenue targets. Guess we need to set some more ambitious goals, right? And that's a really cool conversation to have, to say our brand strategy needs to be updated because it did such an effective job at galvanizing the team.
Right.
And we grew the way that we wanted to grow. So, and honestly, this type of work is so much more fun than being asked to say, like, hey, here's the table of contents of email templates we need. Can you write them? And I'm like, yeah, I can write that stuff in my sleep. I would actually instead like to figure out what really makes you eager to get out of bed early and go to bed late? Like, what positive impact do you want to make, Mrs. Founder, or do you want to
Yeah.
make CEO? And if you can pull that out,
Yeah.
I mean, the emails write themselves,
It
right?
goes back to the why question, right? The Simon Sinek, what is your
Golden
why?
circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is great. Certainly, if your company has the budget, some of the people you work with have the budget to bring your team in to do this kind of stuff. But and I know you have a course for freelancers, but if you're maybe a smaller business, a solo, you don't have the budget to bring somebody in. What do you say to them? How do you help them at least get moving in that direction?
So Google Ventures documented their 3-hour brand sprint process. And it actually incorporates the 3 concentric circles, the golden circle exercise from Simon Sinek that you mentioned. That's one of, I think there are 6 total exercises that you go through, 30 minutes each in 6 hours. But I think that's a good place to get started. If a client either doesn't have the budget, or even if it's somebody who's like just getting started and they're just floundering and trying to find their way, I kind of think that the 3 most important things are understanding the demographics and psychographics of your target audience, ideally a real person that you can interview. And the psychographics are the motivators. Like, what are the desires, needs, fears, goals, objections to buying your thing or working with you, and even like the consequences of doing nothing, right? If you can get clarity around those motivations, emotional drivers, and then turn each of those into something positive that you could do for that person.
Mhm.
So, for example, a lot of clients actually don't have confidence in their brand. So, the emotional end benefit that my team at Bolernum brings is we'll give you a huge boost of confidence, not only in what your brand is, but in your own ability to operate and grow your brand out in the real world, right? But you can never get to some of those statements, to some of those bold promises, if you're not clear on what's keeping Jane in your target audience, what's keeping her up at night, what's causing her heartburn. She feels like she's sort of wasting her time and spinning her wheels, because if she's honest, she's actually not clear on why Todd should give her money instead of the other designer down the road. Like, why should you be able to charge 3 times as much as another designer? Can you really justify that? So getting very clear on the motivations and emotional drivers, fancy term psychographics, of a real person, ideally 3 or 4, but a real person in your target audience, crafting your value proposition based on insights that come from that. What are their pain points? Awesome. Now that you know what their pains and fears and needs are, flip those, turn those into things that you can and will do. That's your value proposition. How are you going to make their pains go away? How are you going to take the thorn out of their foot, right? People really want to pay for the disappearance of problems, period.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know what problems you're actually solving, or if you promise to solve problems that aren't important, or if you're like, we'll build you a beautiful visual identity, that's great. But Tim, he isn't confident in his ability to make on-brand decisions. So by getting deep into that like ideal customer profile, into those psychographics, you actually get a lot of clarity around what are the problems we're really solving. And if we're not really solving them, what do we need to change to tighten up our value proposition, right? So psychographics, ideal customer profile translates into a much stronger positioning statement. I would say that positioning is sort of the high level thing. And then underneath positioning, you'll have your value proposition, various forms of it that you'll use in everything from like a face-to-face conversation. You're at a networking event, or pre-COVID when you were at a networking event, right? And someone said, what do you do? Well, you don't just describe yourself as a copywriter. You're like, oh, well, I help outdoor brands, hunting, fishing, and adventure brands gain more confidence in their brand, tell great stories, and get new customers to join their tribe or whatever, right? The actual messaging is just part of the brand position that comes from the insights from, psychographic research, right? Finally, what are your values? What are you going to do? What are you not going to do? Like, how do you draw a line in the sand? Is it ever okay for someone on your team to lose their temper with a customer, to show attitude? And now we're all going to make mistakes, but a lot of teams, a lot of people make mistakes that injure the brands they're representing because there was never this concerted effort to say, what kind of behavior is okay around here and what kind is not? Do we use profanity? That's kind of a verbal identity question, but how generous will we be when people are upset with us? We said generosity is a brand value, but what does that mean? Right? So getting really clear on brand values and limiting yourself to 6.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I was wondering about. How many values?
Five is even better, right? Because your team will not remember more.
Right.
Sometimes it's easy for me to forget my values, even though they come straight from my heart. So chances are, even if I couldn't remember what was on my list, I'm still practicing it. But right. I go back to my brand strategy at least on a quarterly basis, ideal monthly, just to refresh myself and say, we said that Balernum believes that we do our best work when we're working on an island of calm. Island of calm is one of our brand values because I do not believe that people can do their best creative work when they're anxious.
Yeah.
So it's up to me as the founder and de facto leader to even protect my team from situations and certain clients who would mistreat someone on my team and actually hurt relationships and make it hard for people to do their best work. People cannot do their best work when they resent the people they're working for.
Yeah.
So I have to make choices all the time. Am I willing to have a difficult conversation with a client to protect my project manager, restore a relationship, create some new boundaries? And so for a brand new freelancer, for a digital marketer, for a direct-to-consumer brand, for a services company, everybody across the board, getting clarity around the 5 to 6 values or operating principles that come hell or high water, we do our very best to not deviate from these, because if we deviate from these, we're not who we say we are.
Yeah, I like how you link operating with the values, and you're operating from the value set. I mean, because if you're not operating from the value set, then it's just a token thing you put out there. Well, these are our values,
It's lip
So
service, right?
yeah, yep. I like how you
So
put those together.
this is an important point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm like, when I forget to say this, I get a little bit irritated with myself. Building a brand is simple, but not easy.
Yeah,
The same way building a reputation is simple, but not easy. You build a reputation when you consistently show up in the same way. So if
yeah,
you are consistently patient, kind, generous, thoughtful, and you do that 20 times in a row with one particular person, your reputation with that person, the perceptions of you that reside in that person are of those qualities, right?
yeah,
So this idea of building an authentic brand, well, first of all, brand strategy is how you say, here's what authentic is for us, right? But then with the actual brand building, the reason you need a brand strategy is so that you keep showing up in the same way. And over time, if you keep showing up in the same way, that's how you strengthen your brand. You may have had clients like this, or friends like this, or family members like this, where you never quite knew who you were going to get. There's a Jekyll and Hyde situation.
yeah, yeah.
One day he was your raving fan, and then the next day he was going for your throat, and you're like, whoa, like, what happened? Right? Like mercurial. I'll always love that word. It's like people who are just like, well, they're,
Mercurial. I never.
you
That's
know,
a good word.
um,
Mercurial.
there are brands that are mercurial and that you
Oh,
never know what you're going to get. I thought it was really funny years ago when I think they were still called Comcast and not Xfinity at the time, but they ran a Super Bowl ad where they talked about how excellent their customer service was. And I just laughed. And I'm like, I'm laughing with millions of people around the country as we think just because you say it in a Super Bowl ad doesn't make it true.
no, there are
Because
websites out there.
yeah, that's right. And not to mention, we've all had a dozen experiences that were frustrating, where we couldn't get the answer, where someone refused to take responsibility, where you broke a promise, where you, and so that is what your brand is to me, no matter what you say in a commercial. Your brand is to me, we're too big to fail, so we don't really care whether or not we're honest with you and we actually fix the problem. We
Yeah,
don't care.
there's a disconnect, and having done customer service for a large company, I understand. There's a disconnect often between the people, whoever makes the decisions,
Decisions made way up at the corporate level, and then
and
the
oftentimes the
script.
customer service reps have their hands tied about what they can and can't do. I know
That's
that from
right.
experience.
I had an interaction with QuickBooks yesterday where one of my clients paid an invoice twice. They did a direct deposit and then they used a credit card. And thinking that I was helping them out just with their bookkeeping, I refunded the credit card charge. Well, the refund fee that QuickBooks charged me was higher than the original credit card processing fee. And
Okay.
I was not even able to find like the fee schedule or the pricing for issuing a refund. I tried before issuing the refund to even figure out, is this going to cost me something? If so, what? There was zero transparency around what the fees were going to be. And then, so I issue the refund, get slapped with like $170 fee. $170, right? And so I'm talking to QuickBooks support and I'm like, hey, you all certainly didn't make it easy for me to figure out how much this was going to cost before I did it. I did it, found an ugly surprise. The rep that I was talking to was nice enough, but they're like, okay, well, let me submit a request and we'll see what happens. Well, what came back was a paragraph about that long. And I was like, so basically they're saying no. They had to use 150 words to say no. They used the word like remediation. You're hiding behind words like remediation. But the fact is, you don't care what my story is. You don't care how long I've been a customer. And you really don't even care that you didn't make this information available to your customers. Can you imagine if you or I charged a client without telling them what the price was first?
Yeah.
So it's
wouldn't work very well.
It's weird when a large corporation treats their customers in a way that if you run a small business, you could never get away with that, right? But that being said, brands die from 1,000 or 1,000,000 paper cuts.
Yep.
And so if you have an interaction with a rude customer service agent or a very pleasant customer service agent who shows you just how little empathy is built into the organization when they come back with this boilerplate language, which is so obtuse, it's ridiculous. You're like, okay, I've learned something about your brand today. And anyway, keep showing up the same way and you can't help but build your brand.
Agreed. Very good conversation. Think we're up against our limit. You hit the first question without me even asking, so that works. One thing, and I might have to bring you back on the show just to talk about positioning. So that would be a good conversation to have. But I think we're going to have to go ahead and close it down for today. I do appreciate you being on the show. You brought it. I told you to bring it. You brought it. So I'm very thankful for that. And so I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to the show today, and hope you guys keep on going and never